In the last episode of Jewish Geography, I jumped into politics and shared my reaction to the Paris terror attack. In this episode, I want to step back into the deeply personal. As always, your input in these early stages of the show is super helpful, so if you have any thoughts on how to make this better, please write to me at eitan@rabbieitan.com. That's E-I-T-A-N. Or leave a comment on rabbieitan.com for me. Thanks.
And now, on with the show.
It's not a secret, but it's not something you talk about with strangers. It's not something to be ashamed of exactly, but you kind of are anyway. You could know me for years and not know that I struggle with clinical depression. If you ask, I'll tell you. I'll even tell you what medication I'm on or was last on. But I won't bring it up. There is still a sense of shame surrounding even the most common of mental illnesses. There are people who think you can control it, and those who think they have a magic cure, and people who accept it as they would any other illness, with sympathy, perhaps anger, offers of help and understanding, and inquiries after your well-being. In my world, the world of Orthodox Judaism, people also suggest that you pray, and they quote great rabbis instead of the life coaching gurus and inspirational Facebook meme generators of the secular world. But the rabbis' opinions are not just a Hebrew language version of secular self-help literature. The Jewish tradition is rich in deep insights into the human condition and how to navigate through the troughs as well as the peaks of life. In this episode of the Jewish Geography podcast, I want to talk about the Jewish perspective on depression and on shaping our internal mental world in general. Most of what follows is relevant to every human being because sadness is part and parcel of the human condition. But there is a subset of people who experience clinical depression for whom it's especially relevant. For those people who suffer from severe sadness for months at a time without any improvement, I hope that, along with medical care, the ideas and techniques I talk about here might be of some help. Trust me, I've been there, and I know how you feel. In fact, I'm kind of there right now, which is why I'm tackling this subject now. Part 1. The Shema, a commandment to love? Twice a day, every day, a Jew is supposed to read the Shema prayer, which reads, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. So far, just a simple declaration of faith in a singular God. But the prayer continues. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. Now things are getting tricky. How can you be commanded to love someone or something? Is it even possible to control your emotions? Is it desirable to try? Of several traditional answers, the one I like best is that the continuation of the prayer is not giving you additional commandments, but rather instructions on how to do the commandment of loving God with all your heart. Here's how it continues. And these words which I command you today shall be upon your heart. So the way to love God with all your heart is to keep these words, that is, the commandment to love him, on our heart. In the ancient world, the heart was generally assumed to be the part of the body where our consciousness lived. So saying to keep these words on our heart is like saying to keep them in mind. And how do we keep this commandment in mind? You shall teach them thoroughly to your children, and you shall speak of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk on the road, when you lie down and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign upon your hand, and they shall be for a reminder between your eyes. And you shall write them upon the doorposts of your house and upon your gates. That's it. We're going to feel love for God by reminding ourselves about feeling love, by surrounding ourselves with reminders about God, and by doing things explicitly for God. In other words, we are going to imitate the actions which go with love, keeping the one you love in your mind, helping and doing things for them. This strikes me as basically being a form of cognitive behavioral therapy, where one adopts certain techniques which help them redirect certain thought patterns in their mind to change the wiring in their brains and the feelings that go along with them. By prescribing very specific actions and for us to say specific words, the Torah is helping us to feel what it wants us to feel. It's like fake it until you make it. But in the Jewish worldview, You get full credit as long as you do the actions, even if the feeling doesn't follow. In other words, even just the faking it has its own value. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes serving God with intention is enough to keep you on the right track. But what about when it's not? Part 2. Rebbe Nachman's therapeutic tool chest. Rebbe Nachman was a Hasidic rabbi, a Rebbe, from Mezhebuzh, Ukraine, who lived a mere 38 years, from 1772 to 1810. His life was short and in many ways tragic. Many modern scholars believe he struggled with depression as well as physical illness, and he was devastated when he lost his beloved daughter. In addition to being one of the most masterful musicians of the Hasidic world, who composed numerous beautiful, inspiring, and haunting melodies, he was also one of the all-time great explorers of the human soul. Perhaps because of his own struggles, combined with his great spiritual powers, he created and his followers popularized a number of techniques for connecting to God, which I think fit really well into modern psychological theories, but with a more spiritual orientation. 1. Hitbodedut as self-therapy. Rebbe Nachman is famous in certain circles for encouraging his followers to do hitbodedut, which means spending time alone, that is boded, with God. The way hitbodedut ideally works is that you make a set time in your day or your week where you go to a private place, a place where you're not embarrassed to be seen talking to yourself, and sit for a set period of time and talk with God. Just talk. I've come to think of this as a form of therapy. If you really believe God is listening, then you really are having a conversation, though his answers can be pretty inscrutable, which is also sometimes frustrating on its own. 2. What to talk with God about? The answer is everything. People have been known to cry, beg, scream, thank, and also to complain during hitbodedut. There's a story I heard from Rav Natan Greenberg when I was learning in the Bat Ayin Yeshiva, that Rav Nosson, Rebbe Nachman's great student, had grown up in a wealthy family, and he had a lot of difficulty adjusting to the impoverished life of a Hasid, that is, a student of a Hasidic Rebbe. One day, Rebbe Nachman noticed Rav Nosson looked sad and asked him why. He didn't want to answer, but Rebbe Nachman insisted. Eventually, he admitted with some embarrassment that he was upset because he had lost a button from his coat. Rebbe Nachman asked, "Have you prayed to God about it?" Rav Nosson answered, "How could I bother the master of the universe with such a triviality?" And Rebbe Nachman said, "If it's important to you, then it's important to him. Now go and talk to him about it." The essential message I take from this is that whatever matters to you, whatever troubles and pain is in your heart, God already knows about it and cares about it. In fact, he wants you to talk to him about it. I like to think that when one discusses their pain with God, it turns that pain from a hidden, dangerous secret into an act of love, like sharing your secret pain with someone you feel deeply about. Instead of something that creates distance, it becomes something that creates closeness and intimacy. 3. Rebbe Nachman also talked a lot about non-verbal expressions of our feelings. He encouraged his followers to practice a sort of primal scream, where they let out their pain, and to do something like a deep sigh called krechsin in Yiddish. Yiddish is just so expressive. I love that word, krechsin, and I'm always looking for excuses to use it. Krechsin. Krechsin. In addition to expressing our feelings, krechsin is a great breathing technique. Breathe in deep and let it out. That's better. Now, time to schedule my next hitbodedut appointment. Best part is God doesn't charge by the hour. Part 3, Modern Medicine and Torah. I don't want to leave anybody with the impression that traditional Judaism doesn't believe in doctors and medications. Far from it. According to Jewish law, a person with a serious illness is not only allowed, but in some cases required, to seek help from an expert. In Rebbe Nachman's day, most doctors were unlicensed, ignorant snake oil salesmen, so he encouraged his followers to avoid them. Probably a good idea, since they were just as likely to kill you as heal you. They were still bleeding people in those days. But in our day, where the benefits of modern medicine are obvious and approaching the miraculous, the experts in these issues are doctors, psychiatrists, and other mental health professionals. Just as you would seek out a rabbi for a spiritual ailment and an accountant for a tax problem, you should seek out a mental health professional if you are having serious issues. I see a therapist regularly, and I go to a psychiatrist occasionally to adjust the medication. The Jewish toolkit I've described in this episode goes hand in hand with modern medicine. And if you try to convince someone to the contrary and that person does not get help as a result, you could easily end up transgressing a series of extremely serious prohibitions, including placing a stumbling block before the blind, and al tamod b'dam re'echa, that means thou shalt not stand in the blood of your fellow, as well as the more general commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. And that's it for this episode of the Jewish Geography Podcast. If you enjoyed it, if you like what you're hearing, please go ahead and go onto iTunes, just type in Jewish Geography in the search box and it'll bring you right to me. Please subscribe and you'll get automatic updates to the podcast as they come out. If you use something else, like an Android phone or an RSS feed to listen to podcasts, you can go ahead to my website, rabbieitan.com. That's RABBIEITAN.com, and follow the podcast button at the top of the page, and you'll find all sorts of links for how to subscribe any way you want. If you have any thoughts, please send me an email at eitan@rabbieitan.com. I'm also a tour guide in Israel. That's my day job. So if you're thinking of coming to Israel, go ahead, also take a look at my website, rabbieitan.com. Got some tour ideas, some articles about traveling in Israel, and of course, ways to get in touch with me about your upcoming trip. Thanks, and I'll see you next week.